Hello and welcome to Wednesday Wisdom with Will, our series where we share as we learn everything about generative AI. And to answer our questions is our in-house AI guru, Will Poole. Will Poole is co-founder and managing partner, Capria Ventures. Hi, Will.
Hello, Sandhya.
Well, as I was trying to think about a theme for our conversation, this is probably our fifth or sixth conversation on the same large topic. I was trying to find something new, but I realized things are changing so much every couple of weeks. It made sense to kind of dig a little deeper on something we've touched on earlier. I read an article by Goldman Sachs, and it talks about, and it really throws a cautionary flag on the money, the huge amounts of capital expenditure set aside, right, in the trillions, or at least over $1 trillion. That's huge amounts of money, especially when there's no visibility of returns, right? And of course, there is some amount of positive noise, people saying, no, it's early days, and there is going to be, when we get past the picks and shovels, we will see some fabulous applications which will bring returns. And also against this, I read what Gary Marcus continues to be very, very skeptical. And at the same time, I also read what Eric Schmidt said. Eric Schmidt is the opposite of skeptical, right? He actually said about 6 months ago, he thought the gap between the frontier AI models and the smaller companies was very short. And he's invested a lot of money in these small companies. 6 months later, he's actually changed his stand on that. All of this is going on, and we are earmarking huge amounts of money. How should we be really deconstructing this? And you yourself have worked with one of the biggest tech companies in the world at a different point that was probably looking at a similar dilemma. So can you throw some light on this?
Yeah, I think just the list of opinions that you rattled off, which are all from very smart people, but they actually go in very different directions, right? And so, how's an ordinary person to try to make sense out of this is an excellent question. And I think, but what's illustrative of the number of smart people saying very different things is what many of us have said for a long time, which is nobody really knows. The fact is that this place is changing so fast. The technology is changing so fast that even, as you mentioned, Eric Schmidt, who's arguably one of the more clued in guys in this space, right? The former CEO of Google, he gets his fingers into all kinds of things from an investing as well as from his former perch of the world's largest online services company. And the fact that he would do an about face on large models versus smaller medium models in 6 months just tells you the pace of change. So maybe the best thing to do is to rewind in history a little bit, right? And you think about, I was at Microsoft as a senior leader back in the early 2000s, and there were a lot of heads scratched when Google started putting, tens of millions and hundreds of millions into what's become AWS. I'm sorry, not Google, but Amazon into AWS. And actually, Microsoft and Google were both behind on cloud, and Amazon bet early and they bet big. And what that enabled them to do was to actually have services rolled out around the world that garnered the excitement of the development community. And frankly, to this day, I think it's now about $100 billion business representing nearly half of their operating income. And that would not have happened if Bezos had not had the foresight to make such a bold, large investment way ahead of others. And ultimately, Microsoft, Google, and others in the cloud space had to play catch up. Now, Microsoft similarly bet big on cloud, and they've in fact also built on the order of $100 billion business, and that's serving the enterprise customers very well. And if they had not made that big bet, they would have started losing those customers either to Google or Amazon or somebody else. So what you've heard from the leaders in this space in their earnings calls recently is a statement which I think is very simple, which is saying, hey, the risks of underinvesting are higher than the risks of overinvesting. And now that's particularly true if you're a tech incumbent who's printing cash in your current business, which Microsoft, Google, and Amazon are doing. So they're saying, look, if we don't invest big here, somebody else might come and take the customers, our own customers or new customers that are being created, and then own them for the next years or decades even. And if we invest too big, hey, the capital that we're putting into these things, it doesn't evaporate. It's not like we're spending money on marketing that goes away the next day. We're spending money on actually hard assets going to data centers that can be used for many different things. So I think that the overall view that it's better to be overinvested than underinvested is a simple and clear one. I think that the equity analysts will rightfully call people to be accountable for that, saying, hey, we need to see some profit or at least revenue coming in, which is starting to happen, by the way. OpenAI recently talked about the revenue they're generating from their API keys. Others are starting to talk about the amount of usage that's driving actual top line revenue. So they're going to be held accountable for that by the markets, but I think it's going to happen. And obviously, I'm a tech optimist, so I can't help but believing that, as most of the others, my colleagues, are in this space. But the fundamental point is early days, and early days are going to bring lots of chaos and lots of opportunity.
I want to stay, though, in the area of caution into our next segment, what keeps Will up at night. Recently, there was a huge global infrastructure meltdown, right? It affected airlines and hospitals and so many companies, and it was backtracked to a cybersecurity company called CrowdStrike. Now, Will, as more and more companies join in this AI game, there are currently very few infrastructure and model service providers, right? And this is a huge gap. How do we navigate things at this time?
Well, I think that there's a number of lessons to be learned, and I'm sure some people have lost their jobs because of what happened at CrowdStrike, both at CrowdStrike and their customers, because there were faults at both. And single points of failure, lack of testing of something before it rolled out, the ability to bring down entire systems and not bring them up again. So there are mistakes that happened all around. CrowdStrike was the beginning of that. And it does point to any company that is building a business that operates at scale with a single point of failure has to really question their architecture. And so, in fact, you may remember maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I don't remember exactly, but there was a night when for somewhere between 4 and 6 hours, OpenAI was actually delivering gibberish when you called the API and got results back, right? And that was kind of a wake-up call for everybody that's building what could be fundamental enterprise scale applications that people depend on. There's only one API key that they're using, and that API key was returning gibberish. That was a big problem. So in fact, so one of our views there, and we've been guiding our CTOs that we work with across the world, is to say, hey, figure out how you can become model resilient. How do you actually become model agile? So you could, for example, flip a switch and move from being on OpenAI, hosted by OpenAI, to OpenAI hosted on Azure. Or can you flip a switch and move from being on OpenAI to being on Gemini, on Google, right? So that's actually not trivial, but it's possible.
And since you spoke about our portfolio companies, I want to move to our next section, What's Up Global South. It's our geography of interest as investors. Well, we spoke some time ago what investors should be looking at when they're investing in companies applying generative AI. But like I said, when we started, we're learning every day. Have we changed our thesis? What are we looking at that now that we may not have looked at before? Or what can you tell investors who are beginning to look at companies to invest in? Especially in these markets, I want to add.
Yeah, well, I think that the thing that all investors have looked at in startups for a long time is the concept of moat. And many people have written about this, and the question is really, what's the sustainable differentiation that a founder has built or is building that will make it very difficult for their competition to catch up with them? right? So the best moat ever on the planet in computing is Google AdWords. And the way that thing works is that the more people use it, the more valuable it gets. The more valuable it gets, the more people use it, right? Increasing returns, unbelievable business model. I worked on Windows before. That also is a pretty good moat. The OEM business that we had there, Google AdWords is actually even better. So the question is, when you talk to a new Gen AI embracing founder, you say, hey, what are you doing that's going to create that some kind of a moat today and it's going to be durable over time? And many people come back and say, well, I've got all this data and I've collected this data and I've used that to train my AI or to do what I'm doing, and that's what gives me the moat. And then you find out, well, how did you collect that data? Oh, well, actually, I just went and did this, scraped that, got this from this other source, and now I have the data. Well, your competitors can do that too. So your moat might be there and it might be visible, but it might be really, really, millimeters deep. And what you want is a deep moat. And so the question is, are they getting proprietary data, right? Are they getting data that's really difficult to collect and format and to feed into the AI, or are they getting stuff that's superficial and easy? So that's one question. So what does the data moat look like for a Gen AI application? And so I think that everybody that's in this space is thinking about that age-old concept applied to this new, quite a few different concepts in current technology innovation around Gen AI and data moats in particular.
I always like to end our conversation with shining the spotlight on one of our portfolio companies and how they're innovating and thinking of applying generative AI. I recently caught up with Krishna Venkatraman, the CTO of Kueski. And in fact, he said he's been using you as a sounding board as Kueski thinks about how they can apply generative AI. I know he spoke a lot about internal application to improve productivity internally, but maybe you can talk a little more about how this company, which is one of the leading fintech companies in Mexico, is thinking about this. You can talk about it a little more.
Yeah, so we're very proud to be an investor in Kueski, and they've really made a very good business in the buy now, pay later space when others, even public companies in the U.S., have struggled to build a profitable business in that area. So they're doing very, very well, and we know they'll have a bright future. They also recently inked a deal with Amazon that makes them the BNPL partner of choice for Amazon Mexico, which is, again, a big deal, bringing them tons of new business. And
Very
their
exciting
fundamental
business.
model, sorry?
Very exciting business.
Yeah, indeed. And what's really interesting is that they're looking at the unbanked and underbanked of Mexico, of whom there's a very large number, and certainly any population in the global south probably has a high percentage of the population will be unbanked or underbanked. And what Kueski is then saying is, look, how can we create financial instruments that will address this largely untapped need? And one thing they recognize is that if they're unbanked or underbanked, they're just not super financially literate by definition, right? How would you expect a middle income consumer in Mexico who's never actually had a bank account to know much about how bank accounts work, to know what interest rates work, to know, hey, can their paycheck that they get every month actually cover the expense that they're about to make? So one of the things they want to do then is to provide very relevant information that can help educate their customers. And of course, if you do that on a call center with a whole room full of people who are educated in your messages around and your services in financial services, and they have to take calls from these people, that's very expensive. And one of the killers in the fintech world is CAC. If your cost of customer acquisition is high, you don't make very much per customer. You just do not make it up in volume, right? It's not good. So it's a fantastic application of Gen AI. But you can't just say, hey, go on to ChatGPT and ask questions, because who knows what the answers you're going to get, right? So you need to have a chat bot that has been grounded in exactly what you want to say. And you can use all the language models to help you formulate that, to deal with make sure the question coming in is understood, but the answers that come back have to be grounded in clearly agreed factual reality that is built by the company. And that's what, in fact, a RAG architecture can do really well, and it can create a chatbot that takes all of the, not only the costs out of customer service there, but also takes the variability out, right? Because if you have a new customer service agent who doesn't know something, they could make something up the same way a chatbot could. Yep. But if if the chatbot here is always grounded in factual reality, it's always going to be giving out the right answers, or no answer if it doesn't know, and not making things up, then you can actually have a trusted way to take an underbanked consumer, give them information around financial services, be confident that you're steering them in the right direction. And so that's a great application for Kueski as they scale their buy now, pay later business.
And I think that's a fabulous note to end our conversation with, Will Poole. And I'll look forward to catching up with you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.